Hi everybody, and welcome to Philanthropy Impact's virtual event where we are showcasing some of the donor advised funds available in the UK. My name is Zofia Sahanik and I'm the Director of Membership and Development here at Philanthropy Impact, and also your moderator for today. Before we make a start, I'd like to give a little background on Philanthropy Impact for those of you that are new to us. We are a not-for-profit membership organisation with a mission to increase and improve philanthropy and social investment, but to also encourage impact investing. We act as a knowledge hub and centre of excellence, offering various events like this one where we facilitate specialist knowledge sharing. We're a catalyst organisation that brings people together to discuss, collaborate and learn. It's our aim to empower professional advisors to high net worth and ultra high net worth individuals in supporting your clients better in their philanthropy and social impact investment journeys, right throughout their wealth strategies. And so we carry out professional development training in this specific area. Get in touch with me in the chat if you'd like to know more about that. It's also my job today to make sure everything runs smoothly for you all and give the rules of engagement. As always, please remain respectful to the conversation, the panelists and each other. There will be time for Q&A at the end of the hour. During the session, please do use the chat to introduce yourselves and share thoughts. Use the Q&A function to pose your questions during the event, and at the end of the presentations, if you'd like to ask a question live, please raise your little blue hand. And that leads me to introduce our chair and speaker for today. We've got our board member, Keris Gardner, will be chairing. She's partner at Morris, Turner and Gardner. And joining Keris is our board member, Eddie Finch, who's partner at Buzzacott. They'll be giving their insight into donor advised funds from the work with their clients. And before I hand to Keris, I'm just going to hand over to our CEO, John Pepin, to tell you a little bit about the research that we're carrying out. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Sophia. Thank you all for joining in this. It's really great of you to give time to help people understand what donor advice funds are and the differences. We are doing a research project now where we're getting in touch with every donor advice fund in the UK, collecting information about them and the approach they take, the grant rules, name, etc. That's partway through the process now. Thank you for all of you for participating in that. Sally Rice is in contact with all of you. Once we've collected that information, we will set up a special web page just with that information on it so that professional advisors, philanthropists, wannabe philanthropists, social investors, etc., can go there to learn more about this. And I understand that some of you do research and stuff, so if you want to send the research on to me around this whole area, then we'd be pleased to put it on that page as well. So, Keris, over to you now. Thank you very much for chairing.
Thank you, John. Well, anyone who knows me knows that I'm a huge fan of donor advised funds. In fact, I tend to get a bit evangelical about it, if that's the right word to use. And so when I was asked by John if I would chair this session today, I jumped at the chance because I'm like everyone I've come across in the professional advisory world. We all need to learn a lot more about donor advised funds, what type of donor advised funds are out there, and what you can achieve for our clients. As you all know, as far as Philanthropy Impact is concerned, our mission is, as Zofia has just alluded to, is to help increase philanthropic giving and impact investing, social investing as well. And one way that we, want to be, should we say, helping in that endeavour is to promote and help the general public, should we say, to understand more about what donor advised funds can offer. I must now admit to not knowing much about donor advised funds, say 5, 6, 7 years ago. But as I say, I've become a firm fan for the last few years. And now I don't have a single conversation with any client who comes in to talk about making a gift to charity or setting up his or her own foundation without actually mentioning donor advised funds. So just to set the scene, John has asked me just to mention what a donor advised fund is. So apologies if I'm preaching to the converted here, because I know I am. But in terms of people in the audience who might not know exactly how they work, basically what happens is, as an alternative to setting up your own private charitable foundation, you can instead make a donation to a donor advised fund. And the beautiful thing is about donor advised funds is they take care of all the administration for you. They take care of all the due diligence for you. And so check that any donations you want to make are being paid over to a genuine charitable project or a charity itself. And it saves a huge amount of hassle and time for the individuals concerned. So if you take your average entrepreneur who usually is sort of asset rich, one hopes, but certainly time poor, a donor advised fund offers a really good alternative to setting up one's own foundation. And indeed, it can be a stepping stone to learning about giving, and then with a view perhaps in the future to set up one's own foundation, as well as having a donor advised fund running side by side. That we're seeing that a bit more these days in the UK. So how does it work then? Okay, I, Keris Gardner, I am wealthy, I wish. I make a gift of several £million to a donor advised fund. And what happens is, under the umbrella of the charitable trust, which is the donor advised fund, because I'm making that gift to a charity in its own right, I will automatically be entitled to any tax reliefs that are available, should there be any. We'll ask Eddie to just have a quick chat about that in a moment. What happens is that amount of money I give is then put into a separate fund, which is my fund, and so I can name it the Keris Gardner Foundation, or anything I like to call it, really. And then over time, that will be invested on my behalf, or rather the donor advised fund will hold it and invest it for me for the charitable purposes I want to give to. And then over time, I will suggest the charitable projects I would like to support. And then all the admin, all the due diligence is taken out of my hands, and the donor advised fund takes care of it for me. So it couldn't be easier in concept. And I'm sure that as we go through the various representative stories today about their own donor advised funds, we'll learn a lot more as to what the differences are, how they operate, what they would recommend in terms of suggesting to clients. So, you know, it's going to be quite a journey, I think. And as John said, we're very lucky today to be joined by such a fantastic bunch of people representing a number of donor advised funds here in the UK, all part of Philanthropy Impact's research project into donor advised funds. As you know, Philanthropy Impact is an educational charity in most respects, and we're constantly looking for ways to improve the philanthropy or philanthropic giving here in the UK in whatever way we can. And I certainly am finding that more and more clients are interested in donor advised funds, and we always have that conversation these days. Eddie, did you want to mention anything about tax or any other issues that you're seeing in relation to donor advised funds before we start the show and tell?
Yes, thanks, Keris. Just a few brief comments, really. I mean, I'd just echo everything about the donor advised fund really having taken over for many clients from a private foundation as a go-to route. I think there's most of the advantages that apply to setting up your own foundation apply absolutely equally to putting money into a donor advised fund, and are exactly the same reliefs. That there are some very fine distinctions where you might want to make the decision to set up your own foundation, but those are mostly at the margins. The key tax reliefs, as Keris mentioned, the main one is gift aid on donations in. For cash donations, that simply means that the foundation recovers the underlying basic rate tax on top of what you give them, but also you're entitled to recover any higher rate taxes that you would have paid on your donations. But there are extra special clever ways that money can be put into foundations, including donor advised funds, including gifts of qualifying shares and other similar assets where maybe there are capital gains that you've accrued, and not only do you get a full income tax deduction on passing those into a foundation or donor advised fund, but you also don't crystallise the capital gain for tax purposes. So actually you can achieve very high rates of giving of underlying cost to you compared to what the charity ultimately receives, which are absolutely brilliant. And as I'm sure a couple of our panelists are bound to mention at some point through, there are also ways that donor advised funds can help people who've got tax affairs in multiple jurisdictions. And the particular combination that we're quite familiar with at Buzzicott is dual qualified US UK charitable foundations and donor advised funds, where actually it's typically quite difficult to get relief in both jurisdictions for charitable contributions, but a specific charity setup where a US charity effectively owns a UK charity can facilitate that relief. So from a tax point of view, donor advised funds have all of the benefits of setting up your own foundation with a fraction of the administration. Perhaps if you want to really get the family involved, or you want to give to a range of charitable projects, as Caris emphasised, rather than charities themselves, a foundation might be the way to go. But some of the donor advised funds are very happy to help you with that kind of bespoke arrangement too. And I think what I'm really looking forward to hearing from our other speakers today is the variety of approaches that the different donor advised funds take. What some of them really will insist that you give your money, say, for example, to a registered charity, because they're set up in a way that's got very defined administrative processes, whereas others are linked to wealth advisors and investment houses, and it's much more part of the whole service that those organisations are providing. So I don't really want to say much more about the detail of tax. I think hand over to the speakers.
Thank you.
Operation.
That's great. Thank you for that. That's really helpful. And I think without more ado, we ought to go on to the show and tell, because we have quite a few representatives who have got lots to say. So why don't we start off with Anthony Donatelli of UBS, Head of Philanthropy Services there, who can talk to us about the UBS Donor Advised Fund. Anthony.
Thank you very much. Before I start, just making sure you can hear me okay?
Yes, perfectly, thanks.
Cool, okay. So thank you, Zofia, John, and Philanthropy Impact, as well as everyone for joining. And thanks, Caris and Edward, for making the job pretty easy. As you've explained, I think, what DAFs are in a very clear way. I'm going to give a brief overview of our creatively named DAF, the UBS UK DAF. It's been around since the end of 2013, and I think along with everyone who will speak, we are big fans of the model and collectively seek to grow the pie and help more people give more funding to social and environmental impact. To start, I'll just say a few comments on how our DAF is positioned in our wider philanthropy offering. We have a global team in philanthropy at UBS of around 70 people, with about 8 in the UK. As mentioned, my role is to lead the offering here in the UK. At the simplest level, this group of 70 people is there to help individuals with their philanthropy. And we know people give for all sorts of reasons, whether it's legacy, tax, obligation, solving problems, and we can help with all of that. But where we've structured our offering and where we really want to start is helping people avoid harm with their philanthropy. Unfortunately, there's many examples of well-intentioned money, well-intentioned people actually causing negative outcomes with their philanthropy. So we of course want to avoid that, and we therefore want to maximize our impact, whether that's locally, nationally, or globally. And we define impact as driving measurable outcomes over time, and the key word being outcomes. So what is the change due to our philanthropic intervention? I think we all know of the SDG funding gap, and to address this, we want to fund things that work. So we want to have an evidence base. We want to work with each other and collaborate. You know, none of us have enough money to solve the world's problems alone, and we want to find scalable, sustainable interventions, which oftentimes means working with governments who do manage large pools of capital. So what do we do at UBS, and how does our DAF fit into this? Our offering consists of advice, insights, and execution services. The advisory side is exactly that, providing philanthropic advice alongside investment advice, often starting with strategy and structuring, which is where we bring DAF into a conversation. The insights bucket is all about connecting people, events, trips. We used to live in a world where we'd go with philanthropists to Liberia, South Africa to see impact firsthand. We look forward to doing that next year. In the meantime, we do lots of webinars. And then execution, and this is where our DAF sits alongside the UBS Optimist Foundation. And UBS Optimist Foundation is the house view. So that's where we do deep due diligence and match fund and actually recommend where clients should deploy their capital to maximize their impact. And DAF is our execution-only solution for helping clients with their structuring. So our DAF is like many DAFs. It's an alternative, or as Edward mentioned, potentially a complement to setting up your own UK registered charity without the admin cost governance of doing so. So anyone can set up their own UK registered charity, of course, but to set up any legal entity and to maintain a legal entity, you'll have to pay lawyers, accountants, auditors, have a board, have meetings, keep up with legislation, the governance, etc. The key selling points of our DAF or differentiators, or although some of these points are probably consistent across several DAFs, are firstly that it's a service open to any UBS Wealth Management UK client. There's no admin fees, so it's an add-on free service. The investment platform is very diverse and broad and includes, as Edward mentioned, gifting of shares. There's also the ability to give from offshore in a tax-effective way. And for the donor, for the client, the interaction with their DAF is no different than their interaction with any other UBS bank account they might hold. So in terms of reporting, giving instruction, etc. The UBS DAF makes grants to any UK registered charity. If someone wants to make grants overseas, we can facilitate it, but then there is a fee because we use a third party who does the enhanced due diligence to do that. And then the DAF also gives the ability to give anonymously or not. And then lastly, I think the DAF is able to engage with the advice, insights, and Optimus side of our platform, whereby someone with a DAF account can give to the global platform that is Optimus, where we do the deep due diligence and then we'll add in matched funding alongside a client funding. So the DAF, as I mentioned, has been around since 2013. It grows steadily year on year. I think
30 seconds.
Just ending. Yep, almost 400 million has been given to it since inception. About half of that has been granted out to UK registered charity, and of course the other half will be granted out in due course. So I'll just close there, and I guess we can take questions towards the end.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much, Anthony. That's a really good start. And the next person up is Anna Jossi, of CEO and founder of Prism, the Gift Fund. Before Anna starts, I forgot to mention that Eddie is our timekeeper today, so he will as you saw, jump in with 30 seconds to go, just to remind you that your time is nearly up. Thanks so much, Anna. Over to you.
Thank you, Karis, and thank you, Philanthropy Impact, for inviting me. Prism, the Gift Fund, established it in 2005. And I think delighted to be part of this. Conversation is very timely. A number of you know that Prism last week brought out a think piece on the paradox of philanthropy. And one of the, we conducted a survey with NatSen, and one of the statistics is that 2.5% of those answering only had heard of a donor advised fund. So it's fabulous the work that Philanthropy Impact is doing to promote the concept and get it out there. So who are we exactly, and how do we differentiate ourselves? There are two parts to Prism the Gift Fund in its service offering: the donor advised fund and what we call a collective fund. So let's start with the donor advised fund. Our market is the mid-upper end of the market. So that's our main focus. And we, like I think all the DAFs here, we take cash, we take shares, we take property. Because of the nature of our clients, some of the services are quite bespoke. We pride ourselves on being very efficient and responsive. So, for example, we had a client who wanted to make a gift into a bionic arm company, a profit-making entity with investors. So we engaged lawyers to specifically create a grant agreement that showed a public benefit where these bionic arms would be gifted to a number of different children. So the kind of structures that sometimes come in are not straightforward, and we try to enable a number of different distributions that go out. We do look at social investments. We do have assets under management. So it's a pretty flexible structure that we're providing to our clients. Each client has a relationship manager, and we gift all over the world. And the due diligence, obviously overseas, will take greater time than into a UK charity. Having said that, even UK charities, there's actually quite a lot of due diligence required around them too. We also, like Anthony, we have Prism Offshore, so we do have a number of resident non-doms who will utilize that effectively. The collective fund piece, that is when we have a lead donor who wants to raise money for a cause from a number of donors. So if I give you one or two examples, you may have heard of Choose Love Help Refugees, that are one of the leading refugee groups on the ground throughout Europe. They operate under Prism the Gift Fund. So what we're providing is all the due diligence, compliance, financial administration, and allow them to do their fabulous operational work on the ground, distributing funds to other partners. We have a lot of British Friends of structures. So there could be an entity, for example, in Switzerland who decides to come over here, perhaps run a fundraising dinner, well, in the old days, they don't want to create yet another UK charity. So they operate under our regulatory roof through which to raise funds effectively, often through gift aid at that dinner. We can run all the financial administration around that dinner, and any net proceeds then send to the overseas entity. So it's very efficient and easy for those entities. We have some fabulous new collective funds dealing with response to COVID, Compassion London feeding 6,000 people a day. People such as Soho House have been supporting any employee on an hourly contract running through Prism in London, New York and Hong Kong. So it's a very immediate, responsive structure. And also longevity. We have people building incredible art centers in France, centers of education and reconciliation, Alexander House in Germany. All those capital builds also being done tax effectively through UK, through either one or two donors or a number of donors into that structure.
Oh,
so,
yeah. 30 seconds.
Thank you. In terms of reporting, all our donors get regular quarterly reports, end of year tax statements, so it's pretty easy for their accountants, and our fee structure are fixed quarterly fees, and we pride ourselves on a very lean machine of about 20 staff running a pretty substantial donation income today and distribution around the world. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anna. That was really interesting, and such a varied projects you're running as well. Next up, I think we have Sita Schutt, founder of Prospero World. Welcome, Sita. You're one of the ones I don't know of, so I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
I'm on mute because my cat was trying to get into the meeting as well. Thank you so much for inviting us to this webinar. I think the best way to explain the work of Prospero World is probably a quick story of how we were founded, which was over 12 years ago. We started more on the research side of things. So we were helping a client to research charities that reflected his investment portfolio. So sort of grassroots, sometimes in high-risk areas. And he wanted us to go and find and research these charities. So we created an amazing portfolio. And for him, it was a question of anonymity and also peace of mind, so that often these charities were international and they could go through a UK registered charity, and that created a sort of safety. But we started to share this research with other donors who then came to us asking us for recommendations. And in a sense, that's how the Prospero World DAF grew, organically and through these donor events that we created in order to share the research that we had. So primarily it was anonymity to start with, the peace of mind. Also, as you mentioned earlier, I think it was donors don't like being hounded by charities. So, you know, to sort of outsource that was really helpful. And at the donor events, we had a no fundraising rule, so we could introduce charities to speak about subjects, open up bigger questions like, what do you do with the enemy, for example? And that created, you know, that's the basis of donor education, which we continue to do, obviously not at the moment in the same way. We have, I thought we'd give you a few examples of clients that we have. So client A is a woman who uses us for anonymity. She makes gifts and we go and represent her at the events where we're being thanked on her behalf without knowing who she is, obviously. She gives to big institutions and smaller ones. So we give her monthly reporting. We're very quick and she can just write to us, text us, and the donation will be made, as long as, of course, our trustees have already agreed it. Client B was a young couple who wanted to honor the birth of their baby girl, and they commissioned a field trip to India. So we went on the field trip and 4 grants were made. It was a one-off. Client C is a woman who's just starting out on her philanthropic journey. So she's making sort of tentative grants to start with as she builds her confidence, and we organize events. She sponsored events that we can invite our network to, and she can include hers to grow the capacity of the causes she wants to give to. So anonymity, safe space, and mostly research. So we really feel that we can offer recommendations. We have a small team, but we speak 5 languages between us, and we have a huge network of people in different countries where we've already been on field trips. So we can check. Obviously, like as Anna said, it can take a long time to check things. We once went to visit a school in Cambodia and found that it didn't even exist. So it is important to do that. India especially used to have a lot of issues with NGOs. I think finally, just to say, what gives us our job satisfaction is that we get to find out about what all of the problems are, and who's thinking of the solutions, and then we can bring those to the table. And so we feel we're quite mission led, and we like to share what the charities are doing and how we can improve their performance by advising our donors. I think that is pretty much it. We do also have fiscal sponsorship, so we help the charities on the other side, a bit like the collective fund, but that isn't really part of our donor advised fund. Thank you.
Myself, thank you very much for that. That was really interesting. Lovely to have something a little bit different as well, as you seem to offer. Divya Gosrani, Head of Horde Trustees at the very famous bank. I've known Divya for many, many years. Divya, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Philanthropy Impact, for inviting me to talk today. I think most of you will know the history of Seahor & Co. It's the UK's oldest privately owned bank, and our mantra is being good bankers and good citizens, and philanthropy plays a big part in everything we do in the bank. It's embedded in the heritage of the bank, and in 2011 we became the first UK bank to launch a donor advised fund in the name of the Master Charitable Trust. The main thing about when we established the Master Charitable Trust, we wanted flexibility and simplicity. Our customers didn't want, I guess, to be burdened with the administrative things that go on with having your own foundation. And so what we wanted our structure was to be very, very simple. Flexibility we provide in 2 different ways. So a lot of our donors will give to wide-ranging charitable entities, organisations. The majority of them, I would say 80% of them, go to UK registered charities. And Josie, as she mentioned, even with UK charities, we do have to undertake some due diligence. But having said that, 20% of our donations probably go to international projects or to individuals where we're sponsoring them for scholarships. And just a couple of examples, we got involved in building a school in Israel, which was actually bricks and mortar. And that took a lot of effort on our part as trustees, agreeing how the money was going to be given to the school for it to start the building project, working with our donor who was doing the field trips to make sure that the school was being built. Very simple kind of donations. We've got one of our donors who only likes to give charitable money to saving animals. So we do a lot of project work in European countries where she's saving dogs, rescuing them, housing them. So we will pay for vets bills and all those kind of things. And we have to comply with all the due diligence in terms of Charity Commission and HMRC requirements. All of this is done seamlessly. We will try and give an answer to the donor straight away within 1 to 2 days so that the donation can be made. If there are any agreements to be drafted, we will deal with those as well. Just as an example, over COVID, since February this year, it's been very interesting to see the philanthropic journey go through. We've given away 57 million to charitable causes just from February this year from our donor advice fund, compared to 20 million over the whole of last year. It's been a very interesting journey, and I would say 25% of the money that's been given away this year has been for health and 25% to education, and everything else were to lots of small charities. The other kind of flexibility that we wanted to introduce was to allow our donors to invest their money in a flexible way. So we've got quite a few donors that just leave the money as cash because they're very, very risk averse. But we've got various funds that are discretionary managed by different wealth managers all over the country. And we have some that are execution and advisory only. We have agreements in place with all of our donors as to the objectives of their particular fund, and then what the risk profile is. From an administrative perspective, obviously, that's the burden we're taking away from the donors so that the donors can do the nice bit, which is giving the money away. We deal with all the administrative work behind the scenes. And in terms of donations and recommendations for donations, there are different ways of how people come to us. We have a voucher book, but over COVID, it's been quite interesting. We thought we won't see the use of the voucher book, but that still continues. But quite a lot of recommendations are made by email, telephone calls, or meetings over Zoom. And quite a lot of our donors will set up standing orders, which makes the work quite easy because they're used to giving money away to the same charity on an annual basis. We undertake due diligence, a very, very thorough kind of way. And then in terms of providing them with information, we provide quarterly valuations and statements to all our donors. And over COVID, we've come to a conclusion that we need to give online viewing access. And so we've put that in place as well. So the donors have up-to-date information whenever they want. The nice thing about our Master Charitable Trust and the journey that I've really enjoyed is that when we started the journey, quite a lot of the donors were doing setting up their funds as a hobby. But what we're finding now is that a lot of donors want to involve their children, and especially over COVID.
Just to let you know, 30 seconds.
No, so it's a great way of involving the next generation. So we've had lots of meetings with donors and their children, and it's been interesting to see that children normally choose animal charities to give their money to. So flexibility in every way with our donor advice fund.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Divya. Very interesting. There are some similar themes coming through, and there are other differences, which is quite nice to see. So that's an interesting one. Okay, so we'll line up next. Mark Greer, Head of Private Clients at CAF UK. Thanks very much for joining us, Mark. I'll hand over to you straight away.
Thank you, Caris, and thank you to Philanthropy Impact for inviting me. Yeah, so CAF, if you don't know, we provide financial services to charities and people and companies who give to charity. And so the bit of CAF that I run is our private clients section, which is two main giving services for high net worth individuals who give to charity using our donor advised funds. So I'll talk about them detail in a second, but just a lot of what I'll say applies to both of these services, which are the CAF Charitable Trust, which is our service for our DAF for UK taxpayers. That's tax effective in the UK. It was founded in 1974. And the CAF American Donor Fund, which is our DAF for dual US-UK taxpayers, which allows clients to claim US and UK tax relief on all of their giving, no matter where in the world that giving eventually ends up. They get the tax relief in those two countries, and we've been running that since 1999. So all of our DAFs offer a lot of flexibility in terms of the investments that people can go into. So as people have previously mentioned, a lot can be held in cash, but on our DAFs, people can go into individual shareholdings in companies, funds, ETFs, gilts, bonds, and even some privately held investments like direct holdings in hedge funds or private equity assets we can invest in. In terms of people bringing assets into the DAF, again, similar to what others have mentioned, so we can accept money, we accept cash in sterling, dollars, euro, and then we can hold it in the DAFs in those three currencies. We accept stocks and shares, property, artwork, land, all sorts of different assets can come into the DAF and potentially be gifted out in as those assets, or they can be liquidated and the cash held on the DAF. And of course, as Eddie mentioned earlier, clients really love the gift aid, that 25% when they give cash, if it qualifies for gift aid, that extra 25% that gets credited to the DAF and is then available for them to give away to charities is very, very popular with many clients. We have a very global perspective on giving. So all of our DAFs are multi-currency, so when clients log into the website or get their quarterly statements, they see one overview of all the different currencies that they're holding, and they can make donations out to charities in pretty well any global currency that they'd like to do. We also have a global footprint around the world, so with offices in the US, Canada, Russia, India, Brazil, Australia, and South Africa, which again can really help clients when they're giving to causes in those countries, because we have people on the ground who can guide clients in terms of shaping their giving, but also help with due diligence, monitoring, site visits if clients want to do that. So that global footprint is very, very popular with clients. I've mentioned the two different products, the CAV Charitable Trust and the American Donor Fund. They really work in the same way. The main difference is the tax effectiveness of the donations that come in. Or on the American Donor Fund, we do have to remain compliant with US regulations on what charitable purpose is, and slightly different regulations in terms of how different assets can be gifted into a DAF. And that protects the US tax relief that donors have received. But to all intents and purposes, the mechanics of how it all works is really the same. Offshore is also very popular. So people can give stocks and shares or cash to us offshore. That's very useful for UK resident non-DOMs, because it means they can use non-UK assets. It can come into their DAF and go out to UK charities. They don't incur the remittance charge. And it still qualifies for gift aid and can still be given to UK charities. So very, very useful for people in that tax situation. Donations out, again, similar to, as people have mentioned, we can give to charities around the world. We can form bespoke grant agreements, and we can make loans to charities. We can make gifts to charities, well, actually to organisations that are not registered charities, but whose work is charitable, both in the UK and around the world.
Sorry, Mark.
Is that my 30 seconds? Well, I could talk about DAFs all day, Eddie. In fact, I pretty much do talk about DAFs all day. So yeah, we can do lots of flexibility in terms of the donations out. The last point I'll make is just the online access. So again, people can log in to the website. They can in real time see everything that's happening on their DAF. That works across multiple devices. I used to say that's a great selling point for busy clients who travel around the world, and they can manage their philanthropy on their phone from an airport lounge in Hong Kong, whilst the UK and the US are fast asleep. Slightly less relevant in 2020, but I'm confident that will be very popular again in 2021 once we return to some semblance of normality. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. I'm sure you're right about things will return to that degree of normality at some point. But yes, thank you for that. That was really interesting as well. Next up is Kevin Richmond, Chief Executive of Sussex Community Foundation. Kevin, over to you for your 5 minutes.
So I forgot to unmute myself.
That's
So,
fine.
thank you very much. And thank you very much for inviting me to speak. I'm speaking today on behalf of UK Community Foundations, which I'm a trustee. UKCF is the national body for community foundations. And I'm the Chief Executive of Sussex Community Foundation, which is one of those. So I'm going to start with a joke for a change. So a man goes into a butcher shop and he says, "Please, could you help me with my will?" The butcher replies, "No, but I've got some lovely sausages, fresh in this morning." So the point of this story really is that if you're looking for professional advice, make sure you go to the right profession. And I think if you want to give to charities, and especially if you want to give to local charities, then community foundations are your profession. This is our absolute expertise. We live and breathe the charity sector in our counties. So, and no one really knows the volunteer sector in Sussex as well as Sussex Community Foundation, or in Tyne and Wear as well as Tyne and Wear, or in Worcestershire as well as Worcestershire Community Foundation. We are charities, we're embedded in our communities. So there are 46 community foundations across the UK. Every one is a local charity which has a remit for serving its own community. We can support any charitable cause in our community. We're all quality accredited, both for our grant making and our services for donors. And we all manage charitable endowment funds on behalf of our donors. And the vast majority of what we do is in donor advised funds. So while we're not household names, we are probably one of the largest grant makers in the UK collectively. And last year we gave out £98 million in grants. And we managed over 700, but just around £700 million in endowments across the 46 community foundations. So community foundations are there, they're based on the model of a donor advised fund. We're there both for the immediate giving and for the long term. And one of the things that I'm perhaps most proud of recently is our incredible flexibility. So when the coronavirus crisis started, when the government announced the lockdown around the 20th of March, we got straight into action and started a local appeal for funds. We partnered with the National Emergencies Trust, who are raising funds nationally. And I was on the phone talking to charities in Sussex to find out what they were doing. One of the things I found was the Brighton Hove Food Partnership, that within a week was organising 17 food banks across the region around Brighton and Hove in the area to deliver food, so that there was food delivered within every square kilometre of Brighton and Hove. That was done by a local charity, and we were able to give them a grant within a week to support that work. And in Sussex, we've given £2.5 million in crisis fund grants to charities working right at the front line that most people don't know about in this 6-month period. Community foundations across the UK have given around £85 million in this 6-month period to charities like that, to the food banks, to the befriending services, all those things that we've all relied on in this time. It's community foundations that have been the bedrock of that support. And the funding has come from our donor advised funds, as well as our local and national appeals. So we have a unique knowledge of our local communities, where we are able, because of that partnership with charities, we're able to get money where it's needed really quickly, as well as having a long-term investment. I think a couple of things that are maybe slightly different from some of the other donor advised funds. You don't have to have several £1 million to start a fund at a community foundation. In Sussex, you can have £10,000. You can start with an annual giving fund, or £50,000 for a capital fund. So it's much more accessible than many of the larger donor advised funds. I think a lot of donor advised tend to be donor directed, where the donor has to say, I want to give to this XYZ charity. What we do is we are effectively a charitable trust for our communities. So charities locally apply to us, and we match those applications up with each donor. So each donor gets a short list of applications to support. And that way, I think we provide a fantastic resource for the community, as well as being a service for donors. I'm going to give you one little example. I hope you're wondering what the cartoon is there. This is Arthur Green. Arthur Green rang me in 2009. He'd been told about us by his solicitor. His wife had sadly passed away. 30 seconds, okay. His wife had passed away. It goes very quickly, doesn't it?
You've got time for the whole anecdote, don't worry.
So his wife had sadly passed away at that point. He wanted to do something in her memory. He got to know us really well. Over the 10 years that we knew him, he got to meet the charities he'd supported, and he also had a reception every year at the Mayor of Brighton and Hove giving out the grants. He got to meet the charities. He sadly passed away last year, but because we know him, you know, we got to know him intimately, we will continue his grant making, and we'll carry on that little ceremony with the Mayor of Hove every year to recognise his philanthropy. Thank you very much.
Excellent, thank you.
By the way, I don't know where he got his sausages from though, but
thank you, that's great. And I must say that that's one of the themes I've been seeing, which is local giving has been quite a feature over the last 6 months or so, in terms of, you know, obviously driven by the pandemic. So yeah, it all resonates, I must say, absolutely. So we have next up John Kennedy, CEO of National Philanthropic Trust UK. So John, I'll hand over to you now, if I may.
Thank you, Karis and Philanthropy Impact for having us and having the panel today. Like everyone else here, we exist to make philanthropy more convenient and efficient for donors. All we do is donor advised funds, and we see them, as many donors do, as a great alternative to setting up an additional charitable trust or foundation. Our heritage is actually started across the pond in the US, so we're affiliated with National Philanthropic Trust in the US, which was started in 1996. We were actually founded by a family office, so we come from that heritage. And over in the States, still today, we've just seen exponential growth in donors using donor advised funds to carry out their philanthropy. We help donors in the States, both that come directly to us, and as many of you will know, like Divya and Anthony and others, a lot of the private banks in the US will have an in-house donor advised fund solution, and we white label many of those private banking DAF solutions in the United States. So right now, we administer DAF assets just over $12 billion in the donor advised fund that we administer in the United States. Jumping back over here, which is the more exciting bit for all of us, and for me personally, since I'm based in London, we have two donor advised funds in the UK. We have MPT UK, which is for, like many others, for British taxpayers. And we also have MPT Transatlantic, which, like Mark mentioned, is a dual qualified charity that is tax effective for anyone that pays tax in both the US and the UK. The mechanics work very similarly to as everyone has described how the donor advised funds work, but those are two solutions that we have in the UK. We have offshore facilities for the resident non-doms that want to use either of those, so they both work onshore and offshore. And we have an online portal that allows a donor to access their donor advised fund, make investment recommendations, make grant recommendations online, as well as if they want to talk to us or send us a form. Drilling down just a little bit, and this will be very familiar with, as was described by others, once you're trying to make a donation into your donor advised fund, of course, cash, but like others here, we accept shares, we accept alternatives, private equity, hedge fund interest. It's really trying to pieces of art. It's really trying to make it convenient for the donors to turn other types of assets in addition to cash into philanthropic assets that they can then give away to charities and achieve something good with it. So every client's different, every donor is different. They all hold different types of investments and things, but we try to be as flexible as possible to turn that into philanthropic capital that they can then give away. On the investment side, again, we're very flexible. We don't manage money or have an investment arm. We're not tied to one specific investment manager. So we're very neutral, that the donor can choose from a selection of investment options that we have, or they can also make a bespoke investment recommendation if they wish a specific investment manager to manage the assets on a specific investment strategy, for example. So again, very neutral on that. And then what we also allow, as others do as well, is you can make an investment recommendation into impact investing, which is a real growing trend for the donors that we work with. So instead of going into traditional investments, make a recommendation to also go into an impact strategy, a specific impact fund. There are several of those around town to make it flexible in that way. And then everyone's using a donor advised fund, of course, to give money away to charities and achieve something really good in the world. And so again, we are very flexible. Unlike a community foundation, which is focused on a geography, we are not. So we are focused globally. You can make a grant anywhere in the world. Sometimes we even make a grant back to a community foundation because one of our donors wants to support something locally. But again, you can make a grant in the UK, in the US, or anywhere around the world, and our teams will do the due diligence on that. That's particularly good right now when we're in a crisis and people are moving money for really important COVID work, and our donors have certainly been doing that. And you can get as complicated as you wish if you want to do a bespoke grant agreement to put your name on a building, to endow a chair at a university, do anything like that. We can accommodate that, as I know my colleagues here on the panel can do as well. The final thing I might mention is we do a lot of work with what we call multi-jurisdictional families that are spread out across several countries and often multi-generational families. So you've got different generations spread across different countries. And they use donor advised funds really because they're so convenient in the legacy planning, in the writing of the will and the estate planning of what's happening with the next generation. Often that will be set up using a donor advised fund so that that can carry on the family's tradition after the generation transitions to the younger generation. And so we see a lot of great work with that. So right on cue, I think that's what I wanted to cover. We are delighted that the donor advised fund industry is really growing in the UK. It's remarkable to see how people are, as they're becoming aware of this, are adopting this as sort of their giving vehicle of choice rather than doing it a different way. So thank you again for having me. Ready for questions.
Yeah, I very much agree, John, and I think it's partly due to all of you, everyone on the panel, and all your hard work in making sure people receive the education so that people know about donor advised funds. Because I still think, well, as Anna's report I think probably proved it, or someone's report mentioned that very few people still understand what they are and how they can be so helpful. So it's a real educational piece, I think, this one. Okay, next up we have, I think it's Nicola, isn't it, next? Yeah, it is Nicola. Nicola Johnson, Chief Philanthropy Officer at Stewardship. Again, another well-known donor advised fund. So over to you, Nicola.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Nicola Johnson from Stewardship. So for those who haven't heard of us, Stewardship is a Christian charity. This doesn't mean that we'll only serve Christian donors or only support Christian causes. And we can actually support the majority of charities and charitable organisations as long as they don't conflict with our own charitable objects. So Stewardship has been operating DAFs for over a century now, which might be a surprise to many. We provide a range of services, including a fundraising platform, and currently have assets under management of £170 million. In the last 18 months or so, we've been really sort of extended our offering to high net worth and ultra high net worth individuals. And we've built the philanthropy services team to focus solely on the needs of these clients. And we've got three main products in our philanthropy services offering. And as I hope I'll be able to illustrate today, there are many sort of additional features which make those products very flexible. So firstly, our DAF account. Our DAF account is our sort of entry-level product for philanthropy services, and it's for those looking to give £25,000 or more. The account can be funded again in a number of ways, including cash gifts, gift of shares, and gifts of property, as you've heard a few times today already. But there's the functionality for donors to sort of set up one-off and regular giving too. The account gives donors access to two investment options, which I'll speak about a bit more in a moment, but also gives the donor the opportunity to name the fund in a way that's meaningful for them. Donors can access their account online at any time. We've got a number of useful reports to help them sort of keep track and manage their giving. And as with many other DAFs, we've also got the option for donors to remain anonymous to the charities they're supporting. The second product that I want to share with you today is our Philanthropy Fund account, which is designed for donors wishing to give £500,000 or more, and is a much more bespoke service. So our team works closely with the donor from the outset to sort of really understand where they are on their journey and what they're looking to achieve with their philanthropy. The account functionality includes everything that the DAF account has, but it has a much greater emphasis on a deeper relational connection with the donor, and that enables us to connect them with sort of peers and other philanthropists, other organisations, and relevant opportunities and events if they wish. So an example of a a bespoke service of the Philanthropy Fund, which I think is unique to stewardship at the moment, is the option for us to coordinate and facilitate what we've called a donor advisory board. And this is really a type of collaborative giving, which, as we all know, can be a really powerful tool, and it enables donors to bring other people, such as family members, trusted friends and advisors, into their grant making decision process and set out a strategy for their giving, excuse me, set out a strategy for their giving into the future, to which they can be accountable. And it's really sort of bringing the benefits of collective wisdom back into the DAF structure. And it can give donors an additional dimension for their discernment to give well and achieve their goals. So we can help donors bring family members into their giving decisions and connect them with others to help navigate some of the sometimes tricky situations around intergenerational wealth and the value and impact of giving from an early age. In terms of investment options, our clients have access to 2 pooled investment funds as standard. One has a mix of overseas and UK equities, and the other is a mix of equities, fixed income and assets, and they're designed for sort of medium to long-term investment. But for those giving at a higher level, depending on their appetite for risk and their choice, they might also want to explore our nominated investment options, which give a bit more flexibility. So we've got some investments which are pre-approved funds, and donors can invest immediately. And there's also the option for donors to put forward suggestions for stewardship to invest in. So as well as the more sort of traditional financial type of investments, it might also include social investments. And just to share an example of one of our most recent sort of social investments, we've been working with a charity who house the homeless. And we've had a number of clients who have opted to use some of the funds in their balance to help purchase a home for those in need, which, as you can imagine, has a huge impact both for the donor and the recipient. They get a small return on those funds, and obviously at the end, the funds can be returned to the DAF account, perhaps for a new investment in the future. So it's quite exciting. When it comes to cross-border giving, we partner with an organisation called TrustBridge Global Foundation to help facilitate our international grants. TrustBridge are a central hub based in Switzerland, and they work with other DAFs all over the world, facilitating DAF to DAF giving. So they're operational. Sorry, is that this? Wow, that's gone quick. Okay, so basically they help cut the cost of DAF to DAF giving, cutting the cost of interbank transfers. We also have Stewardship America, which is the dual qualified product, which I think MPT and CAF have also mentioned. Other in-house expertise, including legacy giving, research into sort of bespoke causes and impact reporting as well. Oh goodness me, I'm trying to whisk through all things now. So we've got a huge amount of sort of expertise in house, and you know, the main thing for us is that we want to be providing a first-class service to donors at all levels of giving, and to be able to facilitate that really well. So thanks, I'm really grateful to be involved today, and thanks for taking the time to listen.
No,
sorry I had to rush it at the end.
That was no, it's inevitable, because I know you could all talk for way over hours, probably hours and hours, if not days. But before we hand over to Linda, last but not least by any means, I just wanted to mention that in the Q&A, one of the questions we've got that you could all be thinking about is how commonplace is, let me just see the exact wording because it was two parts to it. How possible / commonplace is the use of DAFs for social investment? So you just mentioned it, Nicola, which is why I thought I'd raise it now to give you all a chance to have a think. I'll come back to you later if I may. I know we're running out of time, but we have got obviously plenty of time to introduce Linda, who's the last on the list. So Linda Millis of Chief Executive of Charities Trust. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Keris, and thank you, Eddie, also for those brilliant introductions. And you've heard obviously a lot about DAFs, where we're up to at the moment, and so I'll try my best not to actually repeat everything that others have actually said. Charities Trust is where are we? We're over 30 years old, and we started life as a payroll giving agency. So payroll giving is still a very big part of what we do. We turn over around 100 million, of which around 50 million is in pre-tax giving, based up in Liverpool, and lockdown Liverpool, as I've been calling it. But what's been interesting for us in that DAF space is that largely we have been managing corporate foundations and corporate solutions. So we've been tending to work in the corporate space and other individuals rather than targeting high net worth individuals or family offices. I just wanted to actually just pop into that question that was asked about social investment, because our first real venture into managing DAFs was in fact through social investment. And there's a little mix here, because we were talking earlier, as Prism described their collective funds. It was in fact a group of donors that came along and wanted to invest in Big Issue Invest when they first launched their first social enterprise investment fund. So our experience has been that largely some of the DAFs have been around, have been about social investment, as opposed to, if you like, just managing general philanthropy. The beauty of all of that is that recycling of funds, and as Nicola was just saying there, that ability for returns to go back into their accounts and for them to do those great and good things again. We also operate around the UK and also overseas, and we also, like everybody else, do the very strong due diligence that is required. But the vast majority of our foundations, as I say, are very large corporate foundations that are dealing largely in cash. So Charities Trust tends not to get involved in investing those funds in that, if you like, in that way, like community foundations may, and like others offer different types of banking and investment options. We're managing that cash, and during the whole COVID and the pandemic, we have managed significantly more. So we will probably manage in the region of around 200 million this year, in, if you like, in all of this space, which has been quite exciting. And with that, also with some of those high net worthers and individuals, one of the things that Charities Trust has wanted to be able to do is to not have social investment or the use of DAFs. I guess a little bit like Kevin was saying, is that you don't have to have millions of pounds to be able to set up. I mean, we literally have accounts with a couple of £1,000s in it. And that description I was giving on the investment into Big Issue Invest, of which we are still a limited partner and still process funds through to them, is that we had donations that were as high as 250,000, and we also had donations that were around 2,000. And so that ability to be able to collectively put those funds together and invest as a, if you like, as a cause, with all of those kind of pro rata returns going back into their accounts for them to do great things, for me seems like such a simple idea. I just wanted to touch on one thing that was in relation to SITR funds, because one of the things that we felt we were being quite creative with is that we had a number of requests from people who have My Giving accounts, which are effectively little mini DAFs, if you like, and they might be managing those funds just to general registered charities or good causes and doing that kind of stuff online. But what we had was requests about using pre-tax funds to be able to manage through to SITR funds. And the reality is that as long as you're not claiming the tax relief, okay to do it. So it's just a case sometimes of the SITR funds to be able to change their paperwork and just have some paperwork that allows those donors to do that. And the same thing would apply when you've got some returns. It will just drop back into those funds.
Sorry, Linda, 30 seconds.
No problem. I think the exciting thing about that was that we had donors that where traditionally they may have given £50,000 to a registered charity, they were giving £50,000, if you like, into a fund like that. And even when they were getting £700 worth of return, it was really exciting for them. So there was that ability to get excited about doing something that felt a little bit more involved, that has made us actually offer this service a little bit more. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Linda. That's great. Really good. I've learned such a lot today, actually, already, and we're only allowed to have 10 more minutes, I'm afraid. So shall we have a look at the Q&As? Does anyone have a feel for this first question we had, you know, how possible, commonplace is the use of DAFs for social investment? Certainly in my experience, I haven't come across it very often at all, if at all, actually, in the DAFs I've seen in operation, but doesn't mean to say it's not happening out there. And of course, Linda, you just made the point, Nicola made the point, I think Kevin made the point. So there's obviously social investment ideas out there. It's just a matter, does anybody have any feel for that? Or is it something that we really haven't?
It's Anna here, hi. That, you know, DAFs can be used absolutely for social investment as a route through to claim the tax reliefs and then out into some kind of social investment. And we have donors, if they choose to do that, they can do that. And in fact, we have a number of donors in the Big Issue Invest from that original investment as well. So, you know, in fact, Big Society brought a lot of the DAFs together to try and encourage the use of DAFs for social investment. It's just another piece that's not widely known.
It's not widely known, exactly. I hope
Karis, if I could,
oh, yes,
I would just echo Anna's point and add that, you know, it's so flexible because you can meet the donor where they are. At one end of the spectrum, they might want an ETF that is an SDG, Sustainable Development Goal focus, so sort of a product off the shelf. And at the other end of the spectrum, they may want a private investment, much more impact focused. That's a private investment structure. So again, you can do either, you know, or anything in between from the donor advised fund, as Anna mentioned.
Interesting. Yeah.
Just to add, we've shortly got a podcast that we're releasing around this conversation about social impact investing, so I can always send that, if it's appropriate, I can send it to Philanthropy Impact to share more widely.
I'd love to see that, really. Thank you. That's really kind, Nicola. That would be really helpful. Second question, very interested to understand about how movable, valuable assets can be, art, for example, can be placed into DAFs. And I know that happens, but does anybody want to take that question and just come back with how you would deal with something like that, if indeed you would accept art into your DAFs?
Sure, I can speak to that. So there's a couple of different ways people do it, and this is an area where US and UK regulation diverge quite substantially. So it does depend on quite what sort of a DAF you're giving it into, but the sorts of things we see clients wanting to do are sometimes they will want to give an asset like that and just realize the cash and have the cash in the DAF. So the usual aims of avoiding capital gains tax, that kind of strategy. Sometimes we'll have clients who, particularly if they have different tax needs, they'll want that asset to end up with the beneficiary. So it comes through a DAF, so it's treated for tax purposes in a particular way. And then usually this would be when it's crossing borders and it would go out. The mechanics, I was going to say, are quite simple. They're not really simple, but the principles are pretty simple. The donor irrevocably gives the asset to the DAF, and for tax purposes, that's the donation that they have made. The DAF, like any charity, would then either liquidate it or make a donation of that particular asset to an art gallery or you know, a library or whatever the end beneficiary of it would be, and it just works its way through. So in simple terms, that's how it works, and that's the sort of scenarios that clients tend to come to us with.
Yes, I can see that would be the only way. Those are the only two ways, really, because you DAFs don't want to be holding on to art, which is sort of, you know, all the storage and other problems it will bring with it. But I can see that. Okay, hopefully that has answered that person's. Hold on, I've got some other comments here which seem to have moved. Hold on a second. Blah, blah, blah. DAFs in the USA have been criticised recently for failing to distribute enough to charities. This is one for John and Mark, I think, and for sitting on funds. Is there any real likelihood of change in the USA, legislatively that is, to require a certain level of distribution each year from DAFs, as there seems to be for foundations in the USA? Asking because presumably any such change would affect the dual DAFs featured in this presentation, of which we know there are at least two. So Mark and John, what do you think on that question? Any likelihood of change? Any sign of change?
I'm happy to kick off, and Mark can fill in the gaps. There's certainly a criticism in the US that doesn't exist in the UK because DAFs are treated with a different tax treatment than private foundations are, and there is a requirement by private foundations to pay out a percentage of their assets each year. That does not exist in DAFs in the US. In the UK, that payout requirement doesn't exist anywhere, so this whole argument doesn't reach the radar at all, and nor do we expect it to. But over in the US, what we see is there is a movement to require DAFs to have payout. We monitor that closely. Of course, if there was a legislative change, it would happen. It would affect the US side of the dual DAFs like Mark and I were talking about. And a lot of the interesting legislation is happening at the state level. California, other places are doing things. For the moment, though, when you educate the lawmakers that the payout ratio is much higher than the required 5%. Payouts out of DAFs are well over 20–25%. There's a lot of education that needs to happen with the policymakers and the legislatures, and that usually that's an ongoing debate that we're monitoring, but it usually helps to put it in perspective that the erroneous criticism that there's just money parked in DAFs that never goes to charity. We have to sort of unpack that a little bit and educate those that are making that criticism.
Well, a very similar question, but about the UK this time, that there's been criticism in the global press of DAFs sitting on funds and donors parking their money in DAFs, and calls for greater regulation and transparency. And do presenters see any change in the UK coming in terms of regulation? Now, again, I've heard nothing about this in anything I've read or seen. So at the moment, and I'm hoping it will continue this way, that the regulators, the legislatures seem to be happy with the way DAFs are operating. But I suppose what we don't really want, John, you will probably say, is to have the same requirement as in the US for private foundations, which is being forced to give away a percentage per annum to be able to continue claiming charitable status. Is that how it works in the States?
That's right. There's a difference in because of the tax incentives are different for that. And so I'll let my colleagues here on the panel answer the UK. I haven't seen that debate come up for the UK because frankly, we don't have a payout requirement for any charity in the UK in the same way. So if that were to happen, it would mean a pretty radical change in the UK environment that would start to require charities to pay out a certain percentage each year. That hasn't hit our radar, but maybe some of my co-panelists have dealt with that.
I think that's right. I mean, I think there's a precedent in the US that just doesn't exist in the UK. And I think the thing that is often missed in this is there's nothing new about the concept of an endowed charitable foundation. You know, people have been setting these up for centuries, and a DAF for many clients is an equivalent of that. And in that sense, there's really nothing new about that concept.
Yeah, no, I get it. I do get it.
Some of the community foundations explicitly hold funds which they describe as endowment, which is an explicit recognition of that.
Yeah, and I would just say, I think maybe as DAFs get bigger in the UK, that criticism that you see in the US could come. But I think the size, the size of DAFs in the US is just exponentially bigger. So it makes sense you see that over there. I suppose also, I suppose we probably wouldn't be in favor of such a requirement to distribute, but on the same side of that coin, the other side of that same coin, I would just echo some comments that Paul Pullman mentioned to our clients last year, where he said his parting message was, we need to act with more scale and with more speed. So, we need money going to solving the SDGs, otherwise it simply won't happen. Now, we don't want to do that. We don't want to distribute for the sake of distributing. We need to do it well. But, it's a balanced approach, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I see that. Yeah. And John, sorry, Kevin.
Just very quickly, I mean, I think there is a technical issue behind this as well. And Mark referred to the fact that endowed charities have been set up for hundreds of years. And traditionally, a lot of those charities were set up as permanent endowments, so that the capital and any capital gain had to be kept in the form that it was given, which meant that they could only give out the investment income, any interest or dividends on those holdings, which did mean that some charities were actually growing in capital and actually having quite a limited benefit in terms of the proportion of their capital that was working in the community. So certainly, more recently, the Charity Commission has been steering charities and I'm sure donor advised funds as well towards having a total return approach to your investment and drawing down a consistent amount. And certainly most community foundations will be drawing around 5% down from the endowment each year. And personally, I think that's good practice.
Kevin, I'm sorry I'm going to have to cut in on you.
Sorry, John, I knew you were hovering there.
I just want to say thank you, Karis and Eddie, for overseeing this, and for all of you for joining in. I found it really quite fascinating, and I'm hoping this and the other work we're doing will help to increase the number of people who are actually using DAFs, because it's a really wonderful mechanism. So thank you very much, everyone. And
can I say one thing before you wind up completely? There are so many questions that I've got and others have put forward, not least from Philanthropy Impact, namely you, that we're going to have another session, I'm afraid, because we haven't asked any of them.
Oh, okay. Would everyone else like to have another session? Well,
Have a shorter one, couldn't we?
I'm not getting any yeses.
Yes.
No, they're fed up.
Great. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. It was really terrific.
Thank you, everyone. That was tremendous. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tremendous. Thanks for everything.
Karis,
Good to see you all.
Thank you.